The year 1901 marked the dawn of a new century in America, a time when photography was still considered almost magical. Families would gather in their finest clothes, hold perfectly still for long exposures, and create precious memories frozen in time. But sometimes these innocent moments captured something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. What you're about to hear is the true story of a photograph that sat unnoticed in the archives of the Chicago Historical Society for over a century. A simple family portrait that, when examined closely by modern technology, revealed a horror so profound that it changed everything historians thought they knew about one of America's most trusted institutions. Before we begin this chilling journey into the past, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most terrifying true stories from history that will keep you awake at night. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Dr. Margaret Walsh had been working as a senior archivist at the Chicago Historical Society for 15 years when she first encountered the photograph. It was a typical Tuesday morning in September 2019, and she was digitizing a collection of early 20th century family portraits donated by the estate of a recently deceased Chicago socialite. The photograph itself seemed utterly ordinary. 3 children, 2 boys, and a girl, stood in what appeared to be a photography studio. The older boy, perhaps 12 years old, wore a dark suit with a white collar. His younger brother, maybe 8, was dressed similarly. Between them stood a girl of about 10, wearing a white dress with delicate lace trim. All 3 children were smiling, genuine, happy expressions that spoke of a loving family moment. Margaret had seen thousands of similar photographs over the years. What made this one slightly different was the handwritten note on the back: Thomas Elizabeth and William Hartwell, St. Mary's Home for Children, Chicago, Illinois, the 15th of December, 1901, St. Mary's Home for Children. Margaret paused, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. She knew that name. It had been one of Chicago's most prominent orphanages, operating from 1887 to 1923. Vended by Sister Catherine McMahon, it had housed hundreds of children over its 36-year existence and had maintained an impeccable reputation for providing loving care to Chicago's most vulnerable children. As Margaret scanned the photograph into the digital archive system, she used the highest resolution setting available. The Historical Society had recently upgraded their equipment, and the new scanners could capture details invisible to the naked eye. It was this decision that would soon turn her world upside down. 3 days later, Margaret was reviewing the newly digitized images when she decided to zoom in on the Hartwell children's photograph. She wanted to read a small plaque visible in the background of the studio. As the image enlarged on her computer screen, revealing details she had never noticed before, Margaret's coffee cup slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. There, barely visible in the original photograph, but crystal clear in the high-resolution scan, were marks on the children's necks, thin, dark lines that circled their throats like necklaces. But these weren't jewelry or shadows from their clothing. They were ligature marks, the unmistakable signs of strangulation. Margaret's hands trembled as she adjusted the contrast and brightness of the image. The marks became even more pronounced. Each child bore the same telltale signs: dark bruising around the neck, consistent with a rope or cord being tightened with considerable force. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the children's eyes. While their mouths smiled for the camera, their eyes told a different story. Now that Margaret could see them clearly, she noticed the slight bulging, the broken blood vessels, the glassy appearance that she recognized from forensic photography courses she had taken years earlier. These children weren't just posing for a photograph, they were already dead. Margaret immediately called her supervisor, Dr. James Morrison, who rushed to her office. When he saw the enhanced image, his face went pale. As a former police detective turned historian, Morrison had seen enough crime scenes to recognize post-mortem photography when he saw it. "This can't be right," he whispered, staring at the screen. St. Mary's was one of the most respected institutions in the city. Sister Catherine was practically considered a saint, but the evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just a family portrait. It was a post-mortem photograph, a practice that was actually quite common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Families would often photograph deceased loved ones as a final memento, especially children who had died young. But these weren't beloved family members being memorialized. These were orphans, children who had no one to mourn them. Morrison made the decision to investigate further. He contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic anthropologist at Northwestern University, and Dr. Robert Hayes, a specialist in historical photography at the Art Institute of Chicago. Both experts agreed to examine the photograph and provide their professional opinions. Dr. Chen's analysis was thorough and disturbing. Using advanced photographic enhancement techniques, she was able to map the exact pattern of the ligature marks on each child's neck. The marks were consistent with hemp rope approximately half an inch in diameter, applied with enough force to cause death by asphyxiation. The positioning of the bodies, the way their hands are placed, even the slight discoloration of their skin, everything points to these children being photographed several hours after death. Dr. Chen explained during a meeting at the Historical Society. Someone went to great lengths to make them appear alive and happy. Dr. Hayes focused on the technical aspects of the photograph itself. He noted the unusually long exposure time evidenced by the perfect stillness of the subjects, something that would have been nearly impossible with living children. He also pointed out subtle details in the studio setup that suggested this was not a typical portrait session. "Look at the way they're positioned," Hayes said, pointing to the screen. "Their bodies are supported in ways that wouldn't be necessary for living subjects. And see this discoloration on the younger boy's hand. That's livor mortis, the settling of blood after death." As the evidence mounted, Morrison knew they had stumbled upon something that could rewrite the history of one of Chicago's most trusted institutions. He made the difficult decision to contact the FBI's Cold Case Unit and the Chicago Police Department's Historical Crimes Division. Detective Lisa Rodriguez had been investigating cold cases for 8 years, but she had never encountered anything quite like this. When Morrison showed her the enhanced photograph, she immediately recognized the signs of homicide. "We need to find out everything we can about these 3 children and St. Mary's home," Rodriguez told her partner, Detective Michael Torres. "If this photograph is authentic, and I believe it is, then we're looking at evidence of multiple murders that went undetected for over a century." The investigation that followed would consume the next 2 years of Rodriguez's life and ultimately expose one of the darkest chapters in Chicago's history. Rodriguez and Torres began by researching the Hartwell children mentioned on the back of the photograph. They discovered that Thomas Elizabeth and William Hartwell had been admitted to St. Mary's Home for Children in October 1901, just 2 months before the photograph was taken. The children's parents, Irish immigrants Patrick and Mary Hartwell, had died in a tenement fire on Chicago's South Side. With no other family in America, the 3 siblings had been placed in the care of St. Mary's, which was known throughout the city for its compassionate treatment of orphan children. According to the official records that Rodriguez and Torres uncovered, all 3 Hartwell children had died of tuberculosis within weeks of each other in December 1901. The death certificates were signed by Dr. Edmund Blackwood, the orphanage's resident physician, and the children were reportedly buried in a pauper's cemetery on the outskirts of Chicago. But as the detectives dug deeper, they began to find inconsistencies in the official story. Medical records from other Chicago hospitals showed no epidemic of tuberculosis in the winter of 1901. In fact, the disease was relatively well controlled in the city's institutions by that time, thanks to improved ventilation and sanitation practices. More troubling still was the discovery that Dr. Edmund Blackwood had no medical license on file with the state of Illinois. A man calling himself Dr. Blackwood had worked at St. Mary's from 1900 to 1903, but there was no record of his medical education or previous employment. Rodriguez decided to visit the cemetery where the Hartwell children were supposedly buried. Graceland Cemetery on Chicago's North Side had been accepting pauper burials since the 1882nd. But when she and Torres arrived with the burial records, the cemetery's groundskeeper, an elderly man named Frank Kowalski, shook his head. "I've been working here for 40 years, and my father worked here before me," Kowalski said, examining the documents. "These burial plot numbers don't exist. Never have. Someone faked these records." The detectives requested permission to search the area where the children should have been buried. Using ground-penetrating radar, they confirmed what Kowalski had told them. There were no graves in the specified locations. As their investigation expanded, Rodriguez and Torres discovered that the Hartwell children weren't the only ones. Over the 36 years that St. Mary's operated, official records showed that 127 children had died at the facility, all reportedly from natural causes like tuberculosis, pneumonia, or scarlet fever. But when the detectives began cross-referencing these deaths with citywide health records, they found a disturbing pattern. St. Mary's reported significantly more child deaths than any other orphanage in Chicago, despite having similar living conditions and medical care. Dr. Chen, the forensic anthropologist, helped Rodriguez and Torres understand what they might be dealing with. Post-mortem photography was common during this period, she explained, but it was typically done by families as a way to memorialize their loved ones. What we're seeing here is different. This appears to be documentation. Someone was keeping records of their victims. The breakthrough in the case came when Rodriguez discovered a storage room in the basement of what had once been St. Mary's Home for Children. The building had been converted into apartments in the 1932nd, but the basement remained largely unchanged. Hidden behind a false wall, Rodriguez and Torres found a metal trunk containing dozens of photographs, similar to the one that had started their investigation. Each photograph showed children, clearly deceased, posed to appear alive and happy. On the back of each photograph was a name, a date, and a brief description: pneumonia, tuberculosis, scarlet fever. But the enhanced images told a different story. Every single child showed signs of violent death, strangulation marks, blunt force trauma, or evidence of poisoning. Among the photographs was a journal written in a careful, precise hand. The entries were signed E.B., presumably Dr. Edmund Blackwood. What Rodriguez read in those pages would haunt her for years to come. The 10th of December, 1901. The Hartwell children continue to resist discipline. Thomas shows particular defiance. I fear stronger measures will be necessary to maintain order among the other children. The 12th of December, 1901 made examples of the Hartwell children today. Their resistance has been permanently resolved. Photograph them for the records. Sister Catherine believes they died of tuberculosis in their sleep. The other children understand the consequences of disobedience. The 15th of December, 1901. Disposed of the bodies in the usual manner, the lime pit in the basement continues to serve its purpose well. Entry after entry revealed the systematic murder of children who were perceived as troublesome, disobedient, or simply unwanted. Blackwood wrote about his methods with clinical detachment, describing how he would strangle children with rope, poison them with arsenic stolen from the orphanage's rat control supplies, or beat them to death with a leather strap. Most horrifying of all were his descriptions of Sister Catherine McMahon, the woman who had founded St. Mary's and been revered throughout Chicago for her charitable work. According to Blackwood's journal, Sister Catherine was not just aware of the murders, she had ordered many of them. Sister Catherine grows impatient with the Murphy boy. Read one entry from March 1902. She has requested that I resolve the situation before the end of the week. His coughing during prayers disturbs the other children. Rodriguez and Torres immediately obtained a warrant to excavate the basement of the former St. Mary's building. What they found beneath the concrete floor confirmed their worst fears. The remains of 43 children were discovered in what Blackwood had called his lime pit, a crude grave where bodies had been dissolved with quicklime to prevent detection. Forensic analysis confirmed that the children had died from various forms of violence: strangulation, blunt force trauma, and arsenic poisoning. Carbon dating and historical analysis confirmed that all of the deaths had occurred between 1900 and 1903 during the period when Edmund Blackwood had worked at the orphanage. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a small room adjacent to the lime pit. This appeared to be Blackwood's photography studio, where he had posed the murdered children for their final portraits. Hooks on the walls showed where he had suspended the bodies, and stains on the floor revealed where he had positioned them for the camera. As news of the discovery spread, more photographs began to surface. Families throughout Chicago came forward with images they had found in attics and basement, portraits of children from St. Mary's that had been gifted to potential adoptive families or donors to the orphanage. Each photograph, when enhanced with modern technology, revealed the same horrifying truth. These weren't happy, healthy children ready for adoption. They were victims of a systematic murder campaign that had gone undetected for over a century. The investigation revealed that Edmund Blackwood wasn't even his real name. Through fingerprint analysis of items found in the basement, detectives identified him as Edward Blake, a former asylum attendant who had been dismissed from institutions in 3 different states for suspected patient abuse. Sister Catherine McMahon's reputation, built over decades of community service, crumbled as more evidence emerged. Historical records showed that she had personally selected many of the children who had died under Blackwood's care, typically choosing those who were sick, disabled, or behaviorally challenging. The motive appeared to be both financial and ideological. St. Mary's received government funding based on the number of children in their care, but also collected additional donations for each child placed in adoptive homes. By murdering children who were deemed unadoptable and claiming they had died of natural causes, McMahon and Blackwood were able to maintain their funding while reducing their actual expenses. More disturbingly, journal entries suggested that both McMahon and Blackwood believed they were performing a service to society by eliminating children they viewed as genetically inferior or morally corrupt. Dr. Margaret Walsh, the archivist whose discovery had started the investigation, found herself at the center of a media storm. The story of the St. Mary's murders became international news, and historians around the world began re-examining their own collections for similar evidence. "I never imagined that a simple digitization project would uncover something like this," Walsh told reporters. "It makes you wonder how many other secrets are hiding in plain sight in our archives." The Chicago Historical Society established a task force to review all photographs from the early 20th century in their collection. They found 6 more images from St. Mary's, showing children who had allegedly died of natural causes, but actually bore signs of violent death. Rodriguez and Torres worked with genealogists to identify as many of the victims as possible. Of the 43 sets of remains found in the basement, they were able to identify 31 children by name. The youngest victim was just 4 years old. The case officially remains open as both primary suspects died decades ago. Sister Catherine McMahon in 1934 and Edmund Blackwood in 1947. However, the Chicago Police Department has classified it as a solved multiple homicide case. In 2021, the city of Chicago held a memorial service for the victims of St. Mary's Home for Children. A monument was erected in Lincoln Park, bearing the names of all identified victims with space left for additional names as more children are identified. The original photograph of Thomas Elizabeth and William Hartwell has been removed from public display at the Chicago Historical Society, but it remains in their collection as evidence of one of the most disturbing chapters in the city's history. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist who helped analyze the evidence, believes that the St. Mary's case represents just the tip of the iceberg. When institutions operate with little oversight and vulnerable populations have no voice, terrible things can happen, she said. The real tragedy is that these children had no one to speak for them until now. The story of the St. Mary's photographs serves as a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades. For over a century, Sister Catherine McMahon was remembered as a saint who dedicated her life to caring for Chicago's orphan children. In reality, she was complicit in their systematic murder. Today, the building that once housed St. Mary's Home for Children stands as luxury condominiums, with residents largely unaware of the horrors that once took place beneath their feet. But the enhanced photograph of 3 smiling children serves as eternal testimony to their suffering and ensures that their story will never be forgotten. The investigation changed how historical institutions approach their photographic collections. Archives around the world now routinely use advanced imaging techniques to examine historical photographs, and several similar cases of concealed crimes have been discovered. As for the Hartwell children, Thomas, Elizabeth, and William, they finally received the burial they deserved. Their remains were identified through DNA analysis and laid to rest in a proper ceremony attended by hundreds of Chicago residents who came to honor children. they had never met but would never forget. The photograph that started it all remains a powerful reminder that sometimes the most innocent images can hide the darkest truths, and that justice, even when delayed by more than a century, can still be served. The enhanced image of those 3 children smiling for a camera while bearing the marks of their murder will forever stand as a testament to the importance of looking closer, asking questions, and never forgetting that even the most vulnerable among us deserve to have their stories told. In the end, what began as a routine digitization project became a journey into one of America's most disturbing historical crimes. And it all started with a simple family photograph that, when viewed through the lens of modern technology, revealed a horror that had been hiding in plain sight for over 120 years.